The man I married disappeared slowly, piece by piece. Not in a single tragic event, but through a creeping erosion. Liam's illness began as a whisper, a tremor in his hand that he'd try to hide, a sudden bout of dizziness that left him pale and clinging to a doorframe. At first, the doctors were baffled. They ran tests, scanned his brain, and came back with shrugged shoulders and vague theories. It was Liam who finally found the answer, after months of late-night research online. He came to me one morning, his laptop open, his face a mask of weary relief. He'd found a specialist, a Dr. Alistair Finch, who was a leading researcher on a rare, degenerative neurological condition. It had a long, complicated name, but the symptoms were a perfect match. That diagnosis became the new center of our universe. The world, once a sprawling map of possibilities, shrank to the size of our small house. My career as a painter, once my passion, was the first casualty. I couldn't be in my studio for hours, splattering paint when Liam might need me. My easel gathered dust in the corner, a monument to a life I no longer lived. My friends were next. Coffee dates were canceled because Liam was having a bad day. Dinners were cut short by a sudden onset of his symptoms. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming. It was easier for everyone that way. I became his nurse, his cook, his memory, his hands. I learned to mix his complicated regimen of medications, organize his pill boxes, and help him dress on the days the tremors were too severe. I learned the subtle shifts in his breathing that signaled an oncoming spell of weakness. My life became a meticulous, exhausting performance of care. And Liam was so grateful. He'd look at me with his wide, pleading eyes, his hand weakly clutching mine, and tell me I was his angel, his savior. He'd say he didn't know what he would do without me, that my love was the only thing keeping him alive. And in those moments, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the ghost of my own abandoned life, it all felt worth it. My purpose was no longer to create art. My purpose was him. He was a master of his own fragile ecosystem. His illness had its own rhythms, its own cruel logic. It would flare up whenever I had plans to do something for myself. A weekend art workshop I'd hesitantly signed up for was preceded by one of his worst ever episodes. A planned visit to my sister's was derailed by a sudden, terrifying bout of vertigo that left him bedridden for days. It seemed my freedom was a trigger for his condition. I felt a flicker of resentment sometimes, a small, ugly thought that his illness had impeccable timing. But I would crush the feeling immediately, drowning it in guilt. How could I be so selfish? The man I loved was wasting away before my eyes, and I was worried about a pottery class. I was a monster. His specialist, Dr. Finch, was a remote figure, a voice on a speakerphone. He was based in another country, a leading researcher who was too busy for in-person visits. All of our consultations were over the phone. Liam would lie on the sofa, looking pale and frail, while I would take notes as Dr. Finch's calm, authoritative voice explained the progression of the disease and adjustments to the medication. I never spoke to the doctor directly. Liam insisted he needed to handle it, that he understood the complex medical jargon better. I was just the caregiver. My role was to listen and obey. For years, this was our normal, a quiet, suffocating routine of sickness and care. I had long since forgotten the woman I used to be. My reflection was a stranger, a tired woman with permanent dark circles under her eyes and a perpetually worried expression. I was Liam's wife, but more than that, I was his warden, his lifeline, and his prisoner. The illness had taken 2 lives, his and mine, and I had no idea that only one of them was real. The lie began to unravel on a Tuesday, Not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a mouse. An email arrived from our insurance company. It was a routine notification about a change in our policy, but it mentioned a need to verify all primary care physicians and specialists on file. Liam was having one of his good days. He was surprisingly energetic, sitting in the living room, engrossed in a documentary on his tablet. "I'll handle it," I said, not wanting to disturb his rare moment of peace. I went into his small home office, a room that had become his sanctuary, filled with his medical research and files. I found the folder with Dr. Finch's information. It contained his contact details, professional address, and billing codes. Everything seemed in order. I logged into the insurance portal and began updating the information. But when I entered Dr. Finch's provider ID, an error message popped up, "Invalid provider number." I tried again, thinking I'd made a typo. The same message appeared. A small knot of unease tightened in my stomach. It was probably just a clerical error, a simple mix-up. I decided to call the doctor's office directly to confirm the number. I dialed the international number listed on the file. It rang a few times, and then a man answered, his voice crisp and professional. "Alistair Finch speaking." It was him, the voice from the speakerphone consultations. "Dr. Finch, hello," I said, relieved. "My name is Clara. I'm Liam's wife. I'm so sorry to bother you, but our insurance company is having trouble with your provider ID." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat of silence that felt a little too long. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice laced with confusion. "Doctor? I think you have the wrong person. My name is Alistair Finch, but I'm an accountant." The world tilted on its axis. My hand tightened on the receiver, my knuckles turning white. "An accountant?" I repeated, my voice sounding distant, foreign. "But you're Liam's neurologist. We've spoken on the phone. The consultations, the medication." "Clara, is it?" he said, his voice softening with concern. "I've known Liam for almost 20 years. We were roommates in college, but I assure you I've never prescribed him so much as an aspirin. He calls me Doc sometimes. It's an old nickname because I helped him with his taxes in school. Is everything all right?" I don't remember ending the call. I think I just dropped the phone into its cradle. My mind was a roaring vacuum, sucking in every memory of the past 5 years and twisting it into a grotesque new shape. The phone consultations. Liam, looking so weak on the sofa, while his college buddy read from a script on the other end of the line. The complex medications. What had I been giving him? Sugar pills? Vitamins? The rare degenerative neurological condition. A fiction. A complete and utter fabrication. I stumbled out of the office, leaning against the wall for support. My legs felt like they were about to give out. I could hear the television from the living room, the narrator of the documentary droning on about the migration patterns of whales. Liam was in there, having a good day, completely unaware that the walls of the prison he had so carefully constructed around me had just been turned to dust. The exhaustion I had felt for years was suddenly burned away by a white-hot surge of rage. It was a rage so pure, so potent, it made me feel alive, for the first time in a very long time. He hadn't just lied to me, he had stolen my life. He had turned me into his servant, his keeper, all based on a pathetic, childish lie. He hadn't been sick, he had been a parasite, and I had been his willing host. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a painter, but they hadn't held a brush in years. They had only held pill bottles and spoons, thermometers, and his trembling arm. He hadn't just taken my future, he had stolen my past. He had rewritten my identity. I wasn't Clara the artist, I was Clara the caregiver. And it had all been for nothing. A lie, a joke, an old college nickname. I walked the living room doorway and watched him. his face wrapped, his body perfectly still. There wasn't a tremor in sight. He looked healthy. He looked strong. He looked like a man who had not a single thing wrong with him. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just going to leave him. I was going to dismantle his entire world just like he had dismantled mine. My first instinct was to storm into the living room and confront him, to scream until my throat was raw. But as I watched him, a cold, chilling clarity washed over me. He was a manipulator. A confrontation without proof would be useless. He would deny everything. He would twist it, claim I was confused, stressed, having a breakdown from the pressure of being a caregiver. He would probably even fake the most severe relapse of his life, a terrifying episode that would leave me feeling guilty and monstrous for ever doubting him. He had been playing this game for years. He was a master at it. I was an amateur. To beat him, I couldn't use emotion. I had to use his own currency, deception. I retreated back into the shadows of the hallway, my heart hammering a new, steady rhythm of purpose. I had to become a detective in the prison he had built for me. I needed evidence, something concrete and undeniable that would expose his lie not just to me, but to the world. For the rest of the day, I was the perfect wife. I brought him his lunch, I fluffed his pillows, I spoke in the soft, soothing tones he was used to. But inside, I was a coiled spring, my mind racing, cataloging every detail, every lie, every opportunity. The opportunity came that night. He had a meticulous nightly routine, which included taking a sleeping pill prescribed by Dr. Finch to help with the nerve pain. I knew now it was probably just a mild over-the-counter sedative, but it was enough. Once he was sound asleep, his breathing deep and even, my investigation began. His office, the supposed nerve center of his medical battle, was my first target. I had always respected his privacy, seeing it as his space to manage his own mortality. Now I saw it for what it was, a stage. I closed the door silently behind me and turned on his desk lamp. The room was organized, filled with medical textbooks and neatly labeled files. It all looked so convincing. I started with the filing cabinet, expecting to find years of medical records, test results, and correspondence. The first drawer I opened, labeled Medical History, was thick with papers. But as I pulled them out, my blood ran cold. They were real medical records, but they were all from years ago. Old physicals, dental records, a report from a broken arm in his 20s. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, related to his current condition. The last 5 years were a complete blank. He hadn't just faked an illness. He had faked the evidence of an illness. The files were a prop. I moved to his computer. It was password protected, of course, but after 5 years of managing his entire life, I knew all of his patterns. I tried his mother's birthday. Nothing. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. Then I tried the name of his illness, the long, complicated acronym he was so proud of having diagnosed. The screen unlocked. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. I went straight to his email. There was no folder for Dr. Finch, but there was a folder labeled College Friends. I clicked it, and there it was. Years of correspondence with Alistair Finch, the accountant. Their emails were a sickening chronicle of their deception. There were jokes about their consultations. Alistair would send Liam links to medical websites, and Liam would craft his symptoms around them. Try adding intermittent, blurred vision, when email from Alistair read. It's a classic neurological symptom and impossible to disprove. Liam's replies were even more disturbing. He wrote about me. He described my devotion, my exhaustion, my love for him. She's a born caregiver, he wrote in one email. She's never been happier. She has a purpose now. He hadn't just trapped me. He believed he had saved me. In his twisted, narcissistic worldview, he had given my life meaning by making me his servant. He saw my sacrifice not as something he had stolen, but as a gift he had given me. The rage I felt earlier was replaced by a profound, nauseating disgust. This wasn't just a lie to keep me from leaving. This was a complete, immersive fantasy he had built for himself, and I was the main character. I took pictures of every email with my phone until the battery died. Then I continued my search. What did a man who pretended to be sick all day do with his time and energy? I checked his browser history. It was a revelation. He wasn't researching medical journals. He was on stock trading forums, day trading with the money I earned from my freelance design work I did in the dead of night to keep us afloat. He was on sports betting websites. He had a subscription to an online poker site where he played for hours. And then I found the most damning evidence of all. He had a folder bookmarked under the name Projects. Inside was a link to a local gym's website. The page was for class schedules. He had been looking at rock climbing classes that took place in the middle of the day on the days he was supposedly too weak to even walk to the kitchen. It was all there. A comprehensive portrait of a healthy, active man living a secret life while I ran myself into the ground just a few rooms away. I carefully closed everything, erased my digital footprints, and turned off the computer. I put the files back exactly as I had found them. I crept back to our bedroom and slid into bed. I lay there, in the darkness, next to the stranger whose breathing was deep and untroubled, and a plan began to form. A cold, meticulous, and elegantly cruel plan. He wanted a caregiver. He wanted to be the center of a medical drama. Fine. I would give him one. But this time I wouldn't be the nurse. I would be the patient. The next morning, my performance began. When Liam woke up, I was still in bed, something that never happened. I was always up before him, preparing his breakfast and his morning medication. "Clara, are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "I'm just so tired," I mumbled, letting my voice sound weak and thin. "And I have this strange headache. My vision is a little blurry." I watched his face closely. For a split second, I saw not concern, but a flash of pure, unadulterated annoyance. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by his usual mask of gentle worry. "Oh, my poor love," he said, stroking my hair. "You've been overdoing it. Taking care of me, it's finally taking its toll. You need to rest." He was already twisting my symptoms to fit his narrative, making my illness a byproduct of his own. It was perfect. For the next week, I mirrored his own behavior back at him. I began to manifest the very symptoms he had spent years perfecting. I would lose my balance in the hallway. I would let my hand tremor as I tried to lift a cup of coffee. I complained of fatigue, of nerve pain, of the same litany of ailments that had been the soundtrack to our marriage. The effect on him was immediate and profound. He grew irritable, impatient. My sickness was an inconvenience, an unwelcome intrusion into his carefully curated drama. "Are you sure you're not just dehydrated?" he'd ask, his tone dismissive. "You can't be getting sick, Clara. I need you to be strong for me." The more I committed to the role, the more his facade began to crack. He was a terrible nurse. He forgot my medication, which was just a glass of water I'd asked for. He grew angry when I asked him to make me lunch, slamming cabinets and sighing heavily. The man who had demanded my ceaseless, selfless care for 5 years couldn't stand to offer even the most basic comfort in return. His narcissism was so profound that he couldn't tolerate anyone else being the center of attention, even for a day. He wanted a caregiver, not a partner. He wanted a servant, not a wife. And my feigned illness was forcing him to confront the transactional nature of his love. The final piece of my plan was to orchestrate a confrontation, but on my own terms. I waited for a day when he was particularly agitated by my sickness. I had spent the morning in bed, and he had been pacing the house, his frustration palpable. I called him into the bedroom, my voice weak. I told him I was scared, that I thought I might have what he had. Maybe it's contagious, I whispered, watching the panic flicker in his eyes. Don't be ridiculous, Clara, he snapped. It's not contagious. You're just run down. But the symptoms are the same, I pushed. Maybe I should talk to Dr. Finch, get his opinion. The trap was set. His face went pale. No, he said a little too quickly. There's no need. He's very busy. I'll email him for you. I have his number, I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. I sat up in bed, the frail patient act dissolving in an instant. I called him Liam. I spoke to Alistair, your old college roommate, the accountant. The color drained from his face. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He looked like a cornered animal. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. You're confused. You're not well. Oh, I'm perfectly well, I said, swinging my legs out of bed and standing up. I walked over to the dresser where I had laid out my evidence. In fact, I haven't been this clear-headed in years. I turned and showed him my phone, swiping through the pictures of the emails. The pictures of his poker winnings. The picture of the rock climbing class schedule. I know everything, Liam. The fake diagnosis, the fake consultations, the lies. All of it. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He tried to deny it, but the words were weak, pathetic. He tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Then he switched tactics. He tried to make it my fault. I did it for us, he pleaded. I was so afraid of losing you. I knew you'd leave me if I wasn't sick. I did it because I love you. No, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. You didn't do it for love. You did it for control. You didn't want a wife, you wanted a cage, and you trapped me in it. But the door is open now. I had a bag packed and hidden in my old studio. My own bank account, which I had been secretly funding, was ready. A lawyer was waiting for my call. I hadn't just uncovered his lie, I had planned my escape. I walked out of the bedroom, leaving him sitting there amidst the wreckage of his fictional world. As I walked out the front door, the sunlight hit my face, and for the first time in 5 years, the air tasted like freedom. I wasn't a caregiver anymore. I wasn't a savior. I was just Clara, and I was finally going back to my studio to paint. The first breath of free air was so sharp and clean it almost hurt. For 5 years, my world had been the stale, recycled air of a sick room, thick with the scent of medication and bleach. Now, the simple smell of cut grass and exhaust fumes felt like a vibrant, chaotic perfume. I didn't drive to a friend's house or my sister's, not yet. I couldn't bear the thought of trying to explain the unexplainable, of trying to unravel the dense, tangled knot of lies that had been my life. Instead, I drove to the coast, the same place I had once planned to go for an art retreat before Liam had one of his most severe episodes. I checked into a cheap motel with a view of the gray, churning ocean. The room was anonymous, impersonal, and for the first time in a long time, it was mine. I sat on the edge of the stiff, scratchy bedspread, and I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. I felt nothing. I was a blank canvas, scraped clean of the thick, oppressive portrait that had been painted over me. Who was I without him? For 5 years, my every thought, my every action had been dictated by his needs. What time he needed his pills, whether the noise of the blender would bother his headache, what I could cook that wouldn't upset his stomach. Without the magnetic pull of his feigned sickness, I felt untethered, floating in a strange, silent void. Then my phone started buzzing. It was him. I ignored it. A minute later, a text message appeared. Clara, please come back. We can talk about this. I stared at the words. The calm, rational tone was a familiar manipulation tactic. A second text followed. I know you're upset, but you're not thinking clearly. And a third. How could you do this to me? You know I can't be alone. I turned the phone off. The silence was a blessing. I lay on the bed and slept for 14 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep, free from the subconscious listening for a cough or a groan from the other side of the bed.
When I woke up, the world felt a little more real. I turned my phone back on. There were dozens of missed calls and a flood of text messages. They were a perfect chronicle of a narcissist's breakdown. They started with pleading, moved to guilt tripping, the pain is so bad today and you're not here, to veiled threats. All our friends are asking where you are. What am I supposed to tell them? And finally, to righteous anger. After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me? You are a selfish, cruel woman. He was throwing every manipulation in his arsenal at me, hoping one would stick. It was pathetic. And for the first time, it was powerless.
I knew I couldn't hide forever. I needed an ally. I called my sister, Chloe. We hadn't been close for years. Liam had subtly driven a wedge between us, convincing me that Chloe was too demanding and didn't understand the pressure I was under. He had isolated me so perfectly. "Clara?" she answered, her voice filled with surprise. "Is everything okay?" "I left him," I said, the words feeling solid, real, now that I was saying them to someone else. "I left Liam." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "What? Why? Is it worse?" "No," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "It's better." "It was never real, Chloe. The illness? All of it. It was a lie." I told her everything. The accountant posing as a doctor, the emails, the online poker, the rock climbing classes. I talked for almost an hour, the words pouring out of me, a torrent of poison I had held in for years. Chloe didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I was finally done, her voice was quiet, but shaking with rage. "I'm going to kill him," she said. "No," I replied, feeling a strange sense of calm. "We're going to do something much worse. We're going to expose him." Chloe insisted I come stay with her. Her house was a chaotic, happy mess of kids' toys and dog hair, and it felt more like a home than my pristine, sterile house ever had. Being with her, I started to feel the fog lift. We talked for hours, and she helped me piece together the timeline of his deception, remembering small, strange details I had long forgotten. Like the time he claimed to be too weak to attend her wedding, but she'd seen a picture online from that same weekend of him at a baseball game with his friends. At the time, she thought she must have gotten the date wrong. Now we saw it for what it was, another brick in the wall he was building around me. The true scope of his campaign, however, became clear a few days later. A friend sent me a screenshot of Liam's social media page. He had posted a picture of himself sitting on the sofa, a blanket over his knees, looking pale and gaunt. He had a talent for looking pathetic. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Going through the hardest time of my life," it read. "My illness is a constant battle, but my heart is broken in a way I never thought possible. My beloved wife, Clara, my angel and caregiver, has left me. The stress was too much for her. Please send her your love and pray she finds her way back home. I don't know how I'll get through this without her." The comment section was a flood of sympathy and support for him. "Oh, Liam, we're so sorry to hear this. Stay strong, buddy. Clara needs to remember her vows, in sickness and in health." And the most painful one from a close mutual friend. "I know how much pressure she was under, but to abandon you now, that's unforgivable." He had spent 5 years crafting his narrative, and he was using it as a weapon against me. He was painting me as a villain, a weak woman who had cracked under pressure and abandoned her dying husband. He was erasing my escape and recasting it as an act of cruelty. I met with a lawyer the next day, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davies. I showed her everything. The photos of the emails, the bank statements from his poker account, the screenshots of his manipulative social media posts. She looked through it all, her expression unreadable. When she was done, she looked up at me. In 20 years of practicing divorce law, this is one of the most elaborate and cruel cases of coercive control I have ever seen. She warned me it would be a fight. He will play the victim to the very end. He will file for alimony, claiming he is too sick to work. He will tell the court you are mentally unstable. We need to be prepared. She helped me file for divorce, and we also filed for a restraining order, citing years of psychological abuse and fraud.
The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and rediscovering the simple mechanics of a life not centered around an illness. I opened a new bank account, I got a new phone number, and I did the one thing I had been both dreading and yearning for. I went to an art supply store. The smell of turpentine and oil paint was overwhelming, a scent from a past life. I bought a new set of brushes, a few tubes of paint, and a large blank canvas. Back at Clara's house, I set up the easel in her guest room. I stared at the blank canvas for hours. I had spent so long tending to his needs that I had forgotten how to listen to my own. What did I want to paint? What did I have to say? My mind was a blank. The artist I had been was a ghost. Liam hadn't just stolen my time and my energy, he had stolen my voice. The legal battle escalated. Liam, through his lawyer, responded to my divorce petition. He denied everything. He claimed the emails were a role-playing fantasy he and his friend engaged in to cope with his devastating diagnosis. He claimed the poker winnings were from years ago. He submitted a statement, supposedly from Dr. Finch, attesting to his debilitating condition. It was a web of lies so thick and tangled it was almost impressive. He was trying to gaslight the legal system itself. He refused to be served with the restraining order, forcing us to hire a process server. He started a smear campaign, sending emails to our mutual friends detailing my erratic and abusive behavior. He was trying to isolate me all over again, to make me feel like I was the crazy one, that my version of reality was a delusion. But this time it was different. I wasn't alone. I had Chloe, and I had a folder of evidence that was about to blow his entire world apart. We were preparing for the first court hearing, a preliminary session to deal with the restraining order and temporary financial arrangements. I was terrified. I would have to see him, to face my captor in a public space. But Miss Davies was confident. Let him build his web, she told me. The more lies he tells, the harder he'll fall when we cut it down. And I held on to that thought, a small, hard point of light in the overwhelming darkness. The day of the hearing was approaching, and I knew it wouldn't just be a legal proceeding. It would be a final public battle for the truth of my own life. The day of the court hearing, I felt like I was walking to my own execution. Every step up the stone courthouse stairs felt heavy, a monumental effort. Chloe was beside me, a silent, steady presence. In the sterile, wood-paneled courtroom, I saw him. Liam was already sitting at the defendant's table, and the sight of him stole the air from my lungs. It was a masterful performance. He was dressed in a suit that hung loosely on his frame, suggesting he'd lost weight. He was pale, his face a mask of weary suffering. He leaned heavily on a polished wooden cane. He looked, for all the world, like a dying man who had been dragged from his deathbed to face a final, cruel indignity. His eyes met mine for a second, and they were filled with a look of such profound, sorrowful betrayal that for a terrifying moment, the old guilt washed over me. I had to physically grip the edge of my chair to remind myself that it was all an act. The hearing began, and Liam's lawyer painted a tragic portrait of a noble man struck down by a rare disease, only to be abandoned by his mentally and emotionally fragile wife. He submitted Liam's fraudulent doctor's note and spoke of my erratic behavior and increasing paranoia. He argued that I had fabricated a fantasy to escape the sacred duty of my marriage vows. He requested that the restraining order be denied and that I be ordered to pay Liam significant spousal support, as his condition made it impossible for him to work. Liam sat there, occasionally dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief, the very picture of a wronged victim. I could feel the judge's gaze on me, a mixture of pity and skepticism. The narrative was powerful. I felt myself shrinking, the old, powerless version of me threatening to resurface. Then it was Ms. Davies' turn. She stood up, calm and composed. "Your Honor," she began, "my client is not the one living in a fantasy." She presented the emails first, reading excerpts of the sickening correspondence between Liam and his accountant friend. Liam's lawyer objected, calling them out-of-context private jokes. Ms. Davies then presented the bank statements from the online poker and sports betting sites,
showing thousands of dollars being won and lost during the hours Liam was supposedly too sick to lift his head. The lawyer countered that these were old accounts, that his client was merely managing past investments. He was good, twisting every piece of evidence. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. It felt like we were losing ground, that Liam's performance was too convincing. "Your Honor," Ms. Davy said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Harris claims he is too ill to work, too weak to even care for himself. He presents as a man on the verge of collapse. However, his actions outside of this courtroom tell a very different story." She placed a thick, bound report on the judge's bench. "Over the past 2 weeks, I hired a private investigator to document Mr. Harris's daily activities. This is his report." She turned on a monitor facing the judge. The first picture that flashed on the screen was of Liam, in jogging shorts and a t-shirt, running in a park. He looked healthy, strong, not a hint of weakness. A date and timestamp were in the corner. It was from 3 days ago. Liam, who had been leaning on his cane moments before, sat bolt upright. The next photo showed him at a grocery store, carrying 2 heavy bags of groceries in each hand, no cane in sight. Another showed him at a driving range, swinging a golf club with perfect fluid motion. And then came the final image, a crystal-clear photograph of Liam halfway up a rock climbing wall at a local gym, his body taut with muscle, his face a picture of focused, physical exertion. Ms. Davies let the image hang in the air for a moment. This photograph was taken yesterday afternoon, during a time when Mr. Harris claimed to be bedridden with vertigo. A collective gasp went through the small courtroom. I looked at Liam. The mask was gone. The pale, suffering victim had vanished, replaced by a man whose face was a furious, blotchy red. The look in his eyes was no longer one of sorrowful betrayal, but of pure, reptilian hatred. He had been so sure of his performance, so confident in his ability to manipulate the world, that he had never once considered that he might be being watched. The judges looked from the photograph on the screen to the man sitting at the table. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, his expression of utter disbelief and disgust. "Mr. Harris," the judge said, his voice dangerously low, "is there anything you would like to say about this photograph?" Liam opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The game was over. The lie was dead. He had been so thoroughly, so publicly exposed that there was no narrative left to spin. The judge's gavel came down with a crack that echoed the shattering of my old life. The restraining order was granted. The request for alimony was dismissed with extreme prejudice. The judge ordered a full financial investigation into Liam's accounts and referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential fraud charges. "I find your actions in this matter to be a monstrous and calculated campaign of psychological abuse," the judge said, his eyes fixed on Liam. "You are not the victim here, sir. You are the perpetrator." I walked out of that courtroom and didn't look back. The validation was a powerful, cleansing wave, washing away years of guilt and self-doubt. The world finally saw him for what he was, a fraud, a parasite, a liar. His downfall was swift and total. The news of the court hearings spread like wildfire through our social circle. The friends who had sent him messages of sympathy now sent me messages of apology. He was exposed, a social pariah stripped of the victimhood that had been his only identity. The divorce was finalized quickly. He lost the house, any claim to our assets, and his reputation. I sold the house and never set foot in it again. I moved into a small apartment with a large, sunlit room that I immediately claimed as my studio. For weeks, I just sat in there with the blank canvas. The ghost of the artist I was still felt distant, but one day I picked up a brush. I didn't think. I just painted. I painted a cage made of pill bottles. I painted a woman with a blurred, indistinct face. I painted anger and sorrow and confusion.
And then I painted a small open door with light pouring through it. I painted for myself, not for a gallery or a client. I painted until my hands were stained and my heart felt a little lighter. It's been a year now. Liam is a ghost from a past life. I heard he moved to another state, likely in search of a new audience for his tragedies. The scars he left are still there. I am more cautious now, slower to trust. But I am not broken. The woman he tried to erase is back. She's a little older, a lot wiser, and she's painting again. He stole 5 years of my life, but in the end, he gave me a gift I never expected: the knowledge of my own strength. He thought my purpose was to take care of him. He was wrong. My purpose is to create. And my greatest creation has been rebuilding my own life, brushstroke by brushstroke, on a clean, blank canvas.